Welcome to episode number 86, Mastering Modern
86.
Spellings.
Wait, we're not 86th. We're not 86 from
Or
here, are we?
86, not 86th.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Whew.
Wasn't Get Smart 86? Mac,
I
remember
don't
that?
know. I
Remember that?
always knew 86 is getting kicked out, right?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I don't know where it came from, but let's get on to the real stuff.
that's right. Well, welcome, Brandon. Good to see you back. We lost Carson today, but we got you back. So that's good.
Yeah.
And we have Bob. I haven't,
Hey, Bob.
yeah.
Aloha.
Yeah. So, yeah, let us know where you're from. Say hello because we've got some good stuff today.
We have great stuff. I have a feeling that both Tom and I are going to be on soapboxes today. It might get a little gritty.
Yeah. Well, we even have some slides. Yeah, I see he confirmed Maxwell
Yeah.
Smart was Agent 86.
There you go.
So, and Brian, hey, what's up, Brian?
Brian, hey, Brian. Good to see you. Love it. Yeah. Anybody else? If you're watching, throw your name in. Tell us where you're at. It's a fun community of people. You might meet somebody. Hey, you might even find somebody that you do work with.
So, Brandon, do you have an announcement before we get started on this?
I do for everybody, whether you're on the podcast or you're live with us. And I think we're live on YouTube. We're live on LinkedIn, of course, our primary platform, and we're live on I think on Facebook too. But yeah, hey, we've got a webinar. So if y'all know, we've added the webinar series with Fist Bump. It's part of our Mastering Modern Selling series, where we go deeper and we get more tactical and practical. And next week's going to be awesome. Mark Hunter, for anyone that knows him, the sales hunter, he and I are co-hosting a webinar together. Mark is going to talk a lot about ghosting, why salespeople are getting ghosted, what you can do to prevent it. He's also addressing a lot of questions that he's been getting lately. Like, we get some engagement, but there's no interest. And all of that also relates to our topic today about the anonymous zone, which is going to be really good. But the webinar, I think Noor's going to add the link into all the comments. It is going to be next Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern. If you register, we'll give you the link for the recording if you can't make it. Hey, this is one you don't want to miss. Come on, it's Mark Hunter. You don't want to miss that.
Yeah, when he was on, a month or so ago on this show, which was a great show. So if you haven't seen it, you may want to check that out. But it sounds like we've got some ghost busting series here going on between today and next.
You know what? I feel like I might have to dress up for that one.
Yeah. I like, hey, Doug from Atlanta. I like Doug in layman's terms. We got some dad's jokes going all the way.
Doug, I love that.
Welcome.
I should have. Somebody told me before, with a name like Brandon, I should have gone into branding, and it would have been. But Doug with the last name Layman, he's got Doug in layman's terms.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump into it.
So, what are we talking about today, Brandon?
We're talking about. Ultimately, we call it the anonymous zone, but for a lot of sales leaders, a lot of sales professionals, it's your buyers don't want to talk, and we know that because we have to make a lot more cold calls to get a conversation. We have to send out a lot more emails to get somebody to reply. It's very, very difficult, and there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of actions and variables that are happening. We talk with Larry Levine. He'll say, hey, we're in such a low trust economy right now for sales that people just don't trust them. And so they don't want to talk to them. But I think it's also not that Larry's wrong. There's these compounding effects, and buyers don't need salespeople. And we know this from the analyst data. And I share this a lot, that when I first started looking at this data, I think it was around 2012, 2013, the data said that buyers were doing about 30% of their research before they reached out to anyone in sales. That number now is up to 80%, give or take, depending on which analyst you follow.
It's higher depending upon your product, right? If your product is not a very, expensive or considered purchase, they may do 99% of it.
Right. And they're doing that because they can. right? They don't need to talk to salespeople. They could go to, if it's on the tech side, they can go to G2 and do a bunch of research,
Uh-huh.
right? They could go into LinkedIn and do a bunch of research. They can go into their community and say, hey guys, I'm looking for this. Who do you recommend? And that is efficient. It's more efficient for them to go to a trusted friend or colleague or former colleague and say, hey, I know you did something around this before. Who do you recommend? And narrow it down. So salespeople, it's just so easy for a lot of buyers to just completely ignore them and not feel like they're losing out on anything.
Because they're not.
And they're not.
So what do we do about this, right? I think that's what we're going to talk about. Do we just throw in the towel and say forget it, or what? Just wait for people to show up eventually?
I hope not. Well, and here's the other one. When when I was on Vince Menzione's podcast, The Ultimate Partner, when I was doing my prep work, I listened to a couple of his episodes beforehand, and there was someone on there that was saying 2024 is a pivotal year because it's a year that millennials become the decision makers for over $3 trillion in decisions. And what does that mean? Well, millennials grew up differently. Like they grew up with these things in their hands. They grew up doing Google searches. They grew up doing different activities, and they bring all of that experience, all that background into their buying process, their research processes, and their desires to engage with buyers. And I think the number that they shared on there, and don't shoot me if my number was kind of off, but it was like 70% of people that in this research they did said they preferred a sellerless experience.
Yeah. Well, and I want to hit Bob's comment here before we jump in, because I was going to touch on this here. Bob's saying, according to Gartner, buyer remorse is on the rise.
Yeah.
So I write about this a lot in my book, right?
Yeah.
The anonymous zone. Pardon?
Well, and it reminds me of
Yeah.
when Matt Dixon was on and
Yeah.
we talked about FOCU instead of
Right.
FOMU.
Right.
The
But
fear of
I think it's a double-edged sword, unfortunately, right? For even the prospects and the buyer, for everybody to be on their own. There's a lot of places to get lost, confused, down rabbit holes. And so again, the buyer, a lot of in the buyer remorse or even buyer indecision, right?
yeah,
Buyer remorse is generally after the fact. It's like, should I have really done this? But even buyer indecision is very, very high, continue to be high, because it's hard for them as well to sort through the noise,
right.
right? So it's hard for us to know what they're doing from a sales perspective. It's hard for them to sort through the noise. How can we somehow meet in the middle and help them make a better decision while at the
Yeah,
same time get us as a sales or in a business, a business organization, getting more data that we're looking
yeah,
for.
yeah. Hey, Rob Fagan, thanks for joining.
Yeah. Hey, Rob.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and it also reminds me when Mark Hunter was last on our show, whatever that was, a month and a half ago. He led with saying, "Hey guys, consistency creates credibility." And when we're using the cold call motions, we're using the email motions, we tend to go through some sort of a sequence, 5 calls, 10 calls, 20 calls, whatever the number is, but they ignore, and then you stop. And there's no consistency. Now, number one, we can argue or discuss, is that outreach method the right way to do it? But still, the reality is that you do it for a short period of time and then quit. And that's not consistent. So you don't have that credibility. Plus, in my opinion, it's not the right medium to be consistent. You call them every week for 3 years, you're just going to piss people off.
Yeah. It's inconsistent, but it's also rude in some cases, right?
Yeah,
So to
absolutely.
the other side. So, well, let's take Rob's comment here. The buyer journey is changing, and we sellers have to have a way to align with that journey. Let's talk about what we are learning, what we're seeing, and how to make that
Yeah.
happen.
And I think also I'm going to shut a few things down here in case we move into the slides. What's interesting for me with that, and I love that Rob said that, because there's been a lot of content. We've been talking about this for years, what I sense, and I see it in our own sales cycles, the acceleration of our sales cycles. Um, we've been talking about this for years, and I think there's been a lot of head nodding. But you and I were talking before we went on the show, is the pain is getting real and really, really freaking real. Like people are not hitting their numbers. And for several years, post COVID, I think pre COVID, it was starting. COVID accelerated a bunch of change, but they had the opportunity to go, when it all goes back to normal, we'll be okay. When we all go back to normal, it'll be fine. And then 2021 came and went. In 2021, a lot of numbers weren't so bad because they lived off pipeline from 2020. But it was in 2022 that the pain started to happen. And I'd say in 2023 was that oh shit moment. And people started to look and take things more serious. And I think now inflation's up. We're in an election year. There's a lot of change going on. And I think now, and I see it just in the calls that I get from people and the acceleration of sales cycles that we have with customers, there's a desperation to find something that's going to work.
Well, and you combine that with certain industries that if you go back to the 21, 22, the growth at all cost era, right?
Right.
It was totally acceptable to be very inefficient in how you got prospects and got customers.
Yeah.
If you spent $5 for a dollar, that was okay. That's
Yeah.
not okay anymore.
Yeah,
So
well, and that's in the tech industry and the SaaS industry, the funded companies, absolutely, and that's gone away. But even in the traditional companies, what I call the real companies and normal companies, right? They're running their business on cash flow,
sure.
not on investment dollars. They can't do that. They've never really done that. But even those companies, the manufacturing companies, the professional service companies, they're reaching out. I mean, it reminds me, and I won't use names, but somebody I spoke to, they've been like 28 years. They're a partner in a company, and he's responsible for business development. And I said, well, the first time we met for coffee, and this was another one of my tapping me on the shoulders of, hey, I know you from LinkedIn, right? And then it moved to coffee. Thanks, Rob. Normal companies. When we first spoke, I said, well, do you still love what you're doing? It's like what I like to ask people, do you still love what you're doing? And he kind of said, he's like, no, I don't. I said, well, why not? And he's like, I miss the days when I could call 30 people in a week and about 15 or so people would return my calls. And half of those would become a conversation, an opportunity, and 2 or 3 of those would close. And it was just fun. Not only were we growing, but I had conversations with people, even the ones that didn't buy. I had conversations with people. It's like now I don't have conversations with people. I call and call and call. We've tried email. We've tried PPC campaigns. We've tried LinkedIn ads. We've tried all these things. And the reality is, I just don't talk to enough people.
Yep. Well, they're out there. So do we want to kind of go through some of the answers to this or some of the things that we're discovering here?
Yeah, let's do it. Lead the way.
Well, I know you had some slides, so I'm
Yeah,
wondering.
let's. I think we should, if everybody's okay with that. That's a little unusual for our show, and I know everybody on the podcast. We're sorry that you can't see these, but come to our LinkedIn page, go to our YouTube channel.
And we'll do our
It'll,
best to describe
it'll
it.
all,
The slides aren't that intricate, so
yeah, they're
there's not
not
many.
that interesting. But so let me see how I'm going to do this. I got to share my screen first, don't I? All right, and can everybody still see that? It kind of hides me.
Yeah, you just need to turn it into the slideshow mode, I think.
Okay, let's see. Are we good?
Yeah, now it's showing both your screens, but that's okay. I think we can.
It shows both my screens.
Yeah, because I think you've got the
All right,
whatever the.
I got this. Watch.
Hey, there you go. Whatever
Does
you
that
did.
work?
That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, I can't see you anymore, so if you make faces at me, I don't see, and I don't see the comments. But
Okay.
like, I love this slide, and I got encouraged to start talking about this again. Thank you, Michael Cups, in our coaching group. He brought this up the other day and said, "Hey, what really got me interested in what Brandon had to say was when he talked about the buyer circle of trust. Like that really resonated me, and so I thought it was appropriate to bring this up. But if we think about the way buyers buy, and I want to encourage everybody, even if you're a sales professional, you're a sales leader, you're a C-suite, take your sales hat off for a second and think about the way you act as a buyer. What do you do? And how many times do you answer a call from someone you don't know? How many times when this rings and it's an unknown number, do you go, oh, let me ask it, let me answer that and see who they are, right? We don't do that. So how buyers buy. First of all, buyers are the center of their universe, as they should be. And they allow themselves to be surrounded. They surround themselves and they allow people to come into their world who they trust, who they allow to come in, who they have respect for, from their content, from what they say, what they do, whatever it may be. They allow those people to come into their world. And they do it through a few different mediums. There's LinkedIn, there's blog articles, there's YouTube channel, there's shows like our show, there's webinars, newsletters, whatever. They allow those things in that they choose to let in. And then you have the unsolicited stuff. You have the cold stuff that's further on the outside. But what we all can do right now is put up this wall. That's why I call it the circle of trust. We can keep people out. We could keep messages out that we don't want to have. We don't have to answer calls from an unknown number. We have junk folders and spam folders that we could crank up the settings, so a lot of stuff goes in there. I haven't looked at my junk folder in years. I used to, years ago, I used to go, well, maybe something important got through. Now I know there's so much stuff that comes to me. I don't even bother looking in my junk folder unless somebody I trust says, hey, I sent you something. It might be in spam. Go look for it. So we keep out. We unfollow people we don't want to talk to and we don't want to listen to. We disconnect. We unsubscribe. And we have tools that make it easy for us to do that. Like on my iPhone, on emails, there's a big unsubscribe button at the top. I can just unsubscribe quick and easy. So we have all these tools in order to solidify and fortify this circle of trust, which means if you're a salesperson, you're a leader of a company, you're a sales leader, and you're outside the circle of trust, the question you have to ask yourself is, how do I get invited? How do I get welcomed in? Because if we keep trying the cold pounding, we just hit the wall. So I'll pause there, Tom.
Yeah, I want to hit a couple of points here.
Okay.
This is an awesome slide, right? It's a really a good slide to, sometimes we take it for granted. We've seen it so many times, but it's really, it's more accurate than ever. Mm-hmm. But on the outside there, right, where you have the red arrows and it says unsolicited emails and pitches, to us as buyers, that's noise.
Right.
That is noise, right? It is noise and distractions that we don't want. Okay. And unwanted noise and distractions. And not only do we do everything we can to keep them away, but if they start to happen incessantly, we get turned off by whoever it is that's going there. So the noise factor is outside that circle. Secondly, is inside that circle, as we're going to talk about more, you may be in the circle or even partially in the circle and you don't know it. Right.
Well, yeah, your buyers might be in your circle and you don't know it.
Right. That's what I mean. Right. You may be in your buyer's circle of trust, right? Or even starting to be in that circle to some degree, but you don't, as a seller, don't know it.
That is a great point.
Hence the anonymous zone that we're going to talk about.
Yeah. And let's pause and unpack that a little bit. And I don't know if there's comments coming in, but I'd love to hear what people.
Yeah, I can see the comments. So if anything comes in, I'll drop them in.
Sure. Because I think that is really, really important. Because we get discouraged, and I hear a lot of times, "Oh, we tried LinkedIn and it didn't work." Look, I think there's two parts of like using LinkedIn. There is a long tail, but there is also a shorter way of doing it with direct messages and asking for meetings. However, if you do direct messaging alone, you're noise. But if you have, we call it a personal brand, it's your reputation, the content that you're sharing. So you're doing the activities that are inside the circle of trust. You have a show. You publish content on a regular basis. You're commenting on other people's content. So you're sharing your expertise, your wisdom, your insights on other people's posts in the form of a comment. and you're commenting with other people in the industry, it builds your reputation. It changes the lens of which people look at you, because now they see you as whatever you want to call it. You're a contributor, you're a thought leader, you have an influential voice, you're connected in the industry, you're well known, people know you. All those different terms, the more active you are, the more they see you in that way. And the lens changes when you reach out to them, and that you're no longer just some faceless, nameless, commission breath a la Larry Levine salesperson demanding their time. You're actually somebody that has influence in the industry.
Well, you go from being a noisemaker, right, to somebody who is you're cutting through that noise, and you're actually getting to the point where there may be people willing to listen to what you're having to say.
And I would say it goes beyond willing. They actually want to talk to you because
Yeah.
you've already demonstrated
Yeah.
with your content, your comments, that you're somebody worth spending time with.
Hmm. It's safe too. It's a lot safer as well.
Right.
So, but I do think it's super important, because just go back real quick. And we're going to talk about this, is that as sellers, especially, even people that have been doing LinkedIn or even webinars or whatever, any sort of thought leadership, you may be in more circles of trust than you are aware. And
Yeah.
I want to hit on Bob's comment. We will, as soon as we get to the next slide here. Bob just left a really good comment that it ties in perfectly to what we're going to talk about here. So yeah, go ahead, Brandon, and jump
Sure.
ahead.
Yay, Bob.
No, and so what Bob was saying here, there's a good way to start off, right? Sam, um, TAM, I think it's what TAM, total addressable market, service addressable market. I can't think of all of them now. There's all these different terminology now about your market. Are the 95-5 space. So only
Yeah.
5% or less are in market, and 95% are interested to one degree or other, farm the 95, hunt the 5%. So I call that the curious and the serious, right? And there's actually a third layer, which is the completely uninterested, right? It's there are, if you're let's say your addressable market is 100,000 companies. There may be, as Bob just pointed out, on the high end, 5% of those that are seriously in market looking for what you're doing. It's probably
Right.
more like 1 or 3% in reality.
Right.
Okay, so that's what, 3,000, 5,000. Let's given the now there's these other 95,000 companies. Some of those are curious. Some of those are looking at what you're doing or
Or
care
they
about
could
what,
be curious.
or could be curious, right? They're potentially able to be curious. And then there's a lot of them that don't even know anything, and they're kind of just oblivious to you and oblivious to whatever it is that you're actually doing there.
Right.
And it's important to separate those out and understand that we talk about capture demand and create, and most companies are trying to capture that 5% or that 3%.
Red ocean.
Red ocean, very red ocean. All right. But yeah, great comment, Bob, because that's what we were going to about ready to talk about here. So
Yeah. And I think some of the tenets that we talk about at Fist Bump anyways is, how do you attract and retain customer attention today? Meaning whether if they're in your TAM, whether they're in the 5% or the 95%, is what you're sharing, what you're talking about, capturing their attention today, versus when you lead with the sales message, you're really only potentially getting the up to 5%. And even then, it's only if they are willing to pay attention. But when you lead with sales message, I got this cool widget, can we talk? 5%, maybe. 95%, definitely no.
yeah. And the fact is the 5%, if you're late to that party, chances are you're not either going to get into the party because they're already down the road, or
Mhm.
way down the road and making that
Or,
decision of who they're going to work with.
and this is what I like, if your competitors are using social, they're creating the right type of content that's speaking to the 100% today, whether they're in market or not. They're creating demand, and they're building that authority and that relationship with their prospects today,
Mhm.
so that if it's in 2 months, 3 months, a year, and they're in market, they go to the company that they've been paying attention to, the one that's been sharing information, the one that has the podcast or the live show, and they're sharing the information who they've been learning from. They don't even bother with the other companies.
Hmm.
So you don't even know the party started.
Right.
You don't even know the party happened, and the party's done, gone, contracts are signed, and you didn't even know it because the way that you try to communicate with those prospects is noise, and you never get in.
Yeah. And you're looking for the needle in the haystack, which is the small percent that's there.
Which is why so many conversations we have right now with sales leaders is they're frustrated, they're scared, pipelines are virtually empty. They still will share, hey, we've got a decent conversion rate when we get people interested, but our pipelines are so small that we don't even have enough in pipeline to feel like we're going to hit our goals.
Yeah. So let's go through this next slide here, Brian, and how buyers actually make decisions. So,
Yeah, Dom's going to take the lead on this, and I want to do a little shout out for Tom here. This comes from his book, The Revenue Zone. As we talk about the anonymous zone, we talk about the engagement zone, we talk about the revenue zone. This is just a new way of thinking about the buyer journey as salespeople, so that we can align ourselves to behave in a way that's more aligned with the way buyers actually do their research, do their behavior, do their activities day after day. So Tom, this is your stuff. So take it away.
yeah, and I think it was a Rob who mentioned earlier, right? The buyer's journey is changing, and this is all a strategy and a technique to help, right? Not just say, well, we're screwed, right? What are we going to do? Just wait. How do we actually d- accomplish, drive sales, build opportunities, create demand, all of that in this new buyer world? So,
And it's still outreach. It's
mhm,
just different
mhm,
outreach. Like
mhm,
we're changing the actions that we do. It's
yeah,
not pound, pound, pound and email, 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 but it's still targeted. It's still outreach. We still have, hey, these prospects we're focused on, but we're showing up differently in their world because buyers demand it.
yeah. So, what this, well, for those of you who are, I guess I will walk through it because not everybody may be able to see this if you're listening. So there's basically a matrix, right? With the x-axis, the horizontal axis, it says know, like, and trust. And the vertical axis, the y-axis, says awareness, interest, and demand. And what we're seeing, and we see this constantly, right, is that when you do actually create some curiosity with a potential buyer, and that curiosity can be teeny weeny or it can be large, right? But there's some level of curiosity. They kind of move into this first area here where we have the awareness. Hey, they may be of an awareness of what your company is, what your product is, what you do, even your market could even just be a market awareness. And they know a little bit about who you are as your company. So that's kind of the bottom lower left corner that's here. What we want, right, from a sales perspective, is we want prospects that like and trust us and that have strong interest and demand in what we're selling. That's what we want, right? That's where we want to get that buyer to go. But the buyer, as we know, right, is on their own journey. We can't control that journey, but how do we influence that journey so that we help become the thought leader and the trusted advisor and the trusted guide that leads them to that point where they're creating more demand and they're building like and trust? So, how can we help influence getting them from the lower left to the upper right? That's what we want to be able to do. Um, Easier said than done. And even what we go through today, this is not necessarily easy, but if you start thinking about it, it puts you in much more control of how you're actually going through.
Mhm.
So, Brandon, anything I'm missing there before I continue? I don't want to go too
No, I think it's good. I mean, I'm so excited about talking about this anonymous zone because our topic today is why do buyers not want to talk to you?
yeah,
And you've made it very clear, and I want to make sure that people are hearing this. You probably have more people in your anonymous zone than you realize. The question is, are you nurturing that?
that's right.
And for so long, we could respond to actions that we saw, but now we have to respond to actions we believe are there, we assume are there, meaning We have to consistently create content. We have to consistently comment and be involved in other conversations. We have to be sharing our knowledge, our experience, our wisdom, because people are watching, people are listening. And I've got a ton of stories that I can share to support this. And just, a quick one. Last Wednesday, I get a message from somebody on LinkedIn that said, "Hey, Brandon, I think I'm finally ready. Can we talk?" And it's somebody I haven't talked to in a year and a half. But when I got on the phone with them that day, it's like, been paying attention to your content, been listening, been reading, love where you're going. I'm ready for my company. What do we need to do? I didn't know for the last year and a half that he was still paying attention, but he was. And if I stopped because I went, "Oh, LinkedIn's not working," and just stopped creating content, I would have lost out on that
Right.
because I didn't stay top of mind. I didn't stay relevant. I didn't stay sharing the information and expertise that our company has.
Yep. So yeah, he was in the anonymous zone for, like you said, at least a year and a half, maybe longer.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So yes, we are, whether we know it or not, we are getting potential prospects that are curious and that are moving into our anonymous zone. Now, what are they doing in that anonymous zone? They may be, as you pointed out, Brandon, looking at a show, watching a show, looking at your LinkedIn post. Maybe they are going to your website and reading a blog. Maybe they are downloading a white paper. Who knows, right? They could be doing a lot of things. One of the things that we want to be able to do is help influence that, which we'll talk more about in a minute about what they're doing. But they're in that anonymous zone, researching, studying, whatever it is that they're trying to do.
And they
And,
want to stay anonymous. Sorry,
right.
Tom, I didn't mean to interrupt. I can't see you, so I can't read the facial cues,
Okay.
but they choose to stay in the anonymous zone. They don't want to talk to you. So you might be making the calls, but they're not ready and they don't want to talk to you.
Right. No, and think about yourself, right? I mean, that's how I do things. You do things, right?
Yeah.
We want to just do our thing until we're ready to need something else other than that.
Yeah.
So that anonymous zone can continue for quite a while. The question that and the challenge is, right, is how do you actually influence that buyer in that anonymous zone to actually not just kind of go around in circles and become confused, which can happen, and actually drive more interest and create more demand for your offering, your business, your versus a competitor or somebody else. And
Oops.
no, it's okay. So
Sorry.
there's really three things, and this is, I talk about this in the book. Here's the simple question that you want to ask. Think about a buyer or a potential buyer that may be in your anonymous zone. There are three things, there's things that you want to ask. What are the three things that you would want your buyer to understand about your product or service or company? And what are the three things, this is an and, not an or, and what are the three things that you would want that buyer to believe about your product and service or your company in order for them to move out of the anonymous zone? In other words, what would cause that buyer, the things that you could help them understand and the things you could help them to believe that would cause them to potentially move out of that anonymous zone, right? If you can answer those questions very simply, right away, that starts to give you a little bit of guidance as to the type of content and the type of messaging that you're providing into that anonymous zone so that people are moving through it because you're doing it with cause in the sense of causing them to understand or believe. Okay, Brandon, I'll stop.
Yeah, no, because I want to, that was excellent. And I want to make sure that we emphasize this and everybody hear this. When they're in the anonymous zone and they want to sit back and they're watching, if so much content right now, and it's just bad content. I mean, I spoke to a marketing person with the Microsoft partner yesterday, and she just said, our social content's bad. It's always about us. It's product focus. We get no engagement, but we keep doing it because we're told to keep doing it. What you're talking about in the anonymous zone and knowing like what are the three things they need to understand and what are the three things that we want them to believe when we think about our content that way, it changes what we're sharing.
Mhm.
It forces us to create buyer centric content and get away from all of our seller centric garbage. I don't mean it to be garbage, but from a buyer's perspective, they don't care about your seller centric content. So it forces us to think more from the buyer's perspective and give them information that's really intriguing for them, captures their attention, gets them on the y axis going, huh, this is interesting, starts to develop more interest. And the more that you do that, and the repetition and the consistency, remember Mark Hunter, consistency creates credibility. The more we do that, it starts moving them up to the point where hopefully they start to have demand. I want to know more about this. And simultaneously with the x axis, our content, the humanity of the content that we add in it too. So it's not just business, 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 but we're also showing a bit of who we are as a person, just like we do in face to face. We share a little bit more about who we are as a human being, not just all business all the time. We start moving them down the trust. Like, you know what? I think I like this guy. I like what they're saying, and you see a little bit about what they do as a human, not just as their title. And we're moving them to the right, higher trust. We're moving them up on the y axis into interest and demand. And that's where they start to get excited. And then they're more willing to move into what you call the engagement zone.
Yeah, exactly. Great summary. And just before we leave the anonymous zone, right, as sellers, we have to trust that we have potential prospects in that anonymous zone, even though we're not getting the signal, we're
Yeah.
not getting the confirmation. And there's a lot of talk right now in the marketing world, especially in the tech space, about technology that can help us give us better signals. Like, what are the signals that are
Right.
there is some ways to get some signals potentially of that there is somebody out there, right? There's somebody there.
Mhm.
But those signals don't necessarily reflect, are they in fact moving to that up the matrix, or are they actually moving
Yeah.
to that point of demand? But we have to
Exactly.
trust that they're there, and that is hard. That is
Yeah.
super hard. I get it. That is totally hard.
Can I interrupt? And again, Tom, I'm sorry, I can't see you, so I don't mean to keep interrupting, but there's also things that we can do to not just trust that they're there. And this is why I say it's still outreach. We can help bring them into the early stages of the anonymous zone by sharing our content consistently and then focusing on our prospects and commenting on their social activity. So if they're commenting on other people's posts, like if they're published content, that's phenomenal. Go comment on their content, build a relationship with them, and then send them a connection request. And then they'll start seeing your content. But if they're not creating content, you can go see LinkedIn shows you here's everything they've commented on, here's all the stuff that they've liked. You go comment on that activity. So here's the example. I know Rob Fagan's on here. I don't know Rob. I want to meet Rob. I want to get to know Rob. I can cold call and cold email. We know it's going to be low probability. But if I go to LinkedIn and I go look at Rob's LinkedIn activity and I see that he comments on Carson's content a lot, I go comment on Carson's content. And I could even go comment on Rob's comments on Carson's content. And all of a sudden, I'm building this bit of a rapport, a relationship, and then I can send a relationship or a connection request to Rob. And it's much more likely to be accepted because he's seen me commenting, engaging, and we start to not just we build rapport towards trust, but we also get rid of that whole lens of just being a commission breath salesperson. So we can trust that they're there, but there's also actions that we can
Absolutely.
do very strategically to
Absolutely.
move people into our anonymous zone. So it'd be more of like taking these people and getting them into the bottom left corner because they've accepted a connection
Yeah.
request.
No,
And they
absolutely.
accepted it because of our actions encourage them to do it, not just another cold blind connection request. Oh, great, I'm going to accept it, and then they're going to pitch slap me.
It's done in a professional, high relationship way along the way. But there is still going to be, as you know, Brandon, there's people that don't comment on LinkedIn. They're not
Mhm.
there, and they still. I mean, we see it all the time, right?
Yep.
The number of people we have no idea that are watching the show or listening to this podcast show up all the time. and they've never been on LinkedIn. They've never connected. They've never done any of those things.
Yeah. Can I tell a quick story to that
Sure.
effect? So I just got booked to go speak at an event in June, and the initial relationship was I got a LinkedIn message from somebody. I got a connection request sent to me with a LinkedIn message from an enterprise sales leader. He said, "I've been watching your show. I had no idea. Really enjoy your perspective and how you guys are approaching. Can we schedule a call?" And since then, over several months, we've been building a relationship, been talking. And then I got the message of, "Can we talk tomorrow?" And I said, "Sure." And we got on a call. He said, "We've got an event. I'd love for you to come speak at it." Anonymous Zone. I had no idea at the very beginning he was even watching our show
Right.
or paying attention to any of my content.
Yeah. So obviously we want to know more. We want to control more. I think your points, Brandon, we'll talk about that in a second, about healthy connections and things like that. But at the same time, we also have to be willing to trust that there are others out there that are listening
Right.
if we're doing the right things. If we're not
Absolutely.
doing the right things and we're just creating noise, chances are there isn't anybody in our anonymous zone that's terribly happy.
Yeah.
The red layer that you have there, once in the and this obviously is dependent upon your industry, what you're selling. Our goal, right, is to move somebody out of that anonymous zone so they're willing to converse with us about their business and basically create and not become what we call an opportunity, right? We want to get people to and businesses to come out of that where there's a certain level of demand and a certain level of like and trust where they become serious and they're willing to have conversation. The next one, if you click the button real quick, and then we can move on to the next slide. Obviously, we wanted, this is the whole framework of my book, is obviously we want them in that upper right corner in the revenue zone where they're really seriously considering doing business with us. And they're not just an opportunity, but they're a high probability opportunity, right? Which is what we all want is high intent, high probability opportunities. That's what we want in that upper right corner. But we have to develop that. Sometimes that'll happen. It'll leapfrog, just like to your point, Brandon, it'll leapfrog right from the anonymous zone to the revenue zone. Sometimes it'll have some additional engagement that will be required, but at least that engagement is of much higher quality
Yeah.
once they get to that point.
And sometimes they spend a long period of time in the engagement zone. Like
Mhm.
I've had somebody sent me a message a while ago and asked me a question, and then it moved into, "Can we have a conversation? Would you speak with my team?" And then kind of disappeared for a while, and then engaged again. Like we've got to let buyers follow their own path because there's so many variables that they're dealing with. They've got budgets, they have budget cycles, they have internal things happening. But if we push, they're gonna back off and want to be out. We've got to consistently be providing value added content and be available, but not too pushy.
Mhm. Do you want to go to the next slide?
I do. I want to say one last thing on this. I think this slide, this process, I think over the last several years, you get a lot of people that go, okay, but then they want to go right back into making the cold calls and sending the emails because it feels like you have more control.
Right. And this can feel like it's passive and it's not passive.
Exactly.
It'll
That's the
feel
point
passive.
I wanted to
Right.
make.
Right.
Yeah. This is not passive. This isn't, oh, social media. Oh, it's long tail. That's why I wanted to make that point when you were saying the anonymous zone, you got to believe that people are there. We also can very actively, very aggressively do activities to get people into our anonymous zone because the content we share, the way that we communicate on LinkedIn, even the content in our newsletters and stuff, if it's not so sales, but it's actually buyer centric, something that 100% of our TAM would look at today and go, that's valuable to me, whether they were in market or not. That's how we actively and aggressively bring people into our community, and they're in our anonymous zone. Now, how active they are and all that totally depends on them. But when we do the activities that we can control, it is very active, it is very aggressive, and we're building out our community. And the more people you have in the anonymous zone, obviously, the more people are going to move to the engagement zone and ultimately to the revenue zone. and it could feel passive because of the past 50 years of the way we pounded sales. But with a modern buyer, this is just the way it has to be because this is the way they behave.
Mm-hmm. And it's the way we behave, right? When we buy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So a couple strategies here, if you kind of, and I think we've touched on some of these, but one way to start moving people through that anonymous zone as they move in there, right? You touched on this, Brandon. I think the first step here you have is, and again, this can be, through LinkedIn or what have you, some form
Face
of
to
healthy
face.
connection,
Yeah.
right? Could be face to face, could be something, but LinkedIn and social media is a very safe way for most people to develop that healthy connection.
Yeah, and I think, look, I'm not opposed to calls. I think that if you're doing cold calls, you may want to change up the messaging strategy. Like if you cold call and say, hey, we've got this report that we want to share with you, or we have a show that we want to invite you to. Our topic is XYZ. I thought it would be valuable to you. I think there's lots of ways of building that healthy connection. But the traditional way of, hey, we've got ABC product. We think it can help you. Do you have time for a meeting? That is just depreciating value.
Yeah. I want to hit Bob's comment here real quick because
Sure.
I know you can't see it. He's exactly right. It's what we were just talking about. When reason where people revert to phones and emails for outreach is because it's hard that the seller is remaining anonymous, right? Social media is all about anonymity, is on it, easy for me to say, being anonymous, right?
Yeah.
Along the way. So because it feels good, right? It feels like, okay, I can call Brandon. I know Brandon. I have a name here. I have an email. I can reach out to Brandon and it feels better. I get it. It feels like you're doing more, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
It's a bit of go slow to move fast, as
yeah.
we've said.
Okay. So what's the next circle there?
Willing to converse and engage. You got that one?
No, go ahead.
Oh,
So, yeah, I mean, once you've built that healthy connection, right? Then what we want to do, and again, this comes back to our content, the things that we just talked about, is how do we influence them? And the key thing is influence them to get to the point where they're willing to converse and engage, hence the engagement zone that we were talking about earlier. So we're really trying to, again, create a healthy connection if we can, but then use the content, create those three understandings, those three beliefs that we're talking about that causes somebody to then be willing to converse and engage in some way, shape, or form. And it can happen faster, right? Depending upon the quality of who you're dealing with, the quality of the content. And once you get better at it, this will start to happen faster. Then that turns into a real desire to really learn about your business and learn about how they can do business with you, which then brings them to that right corner, which is what we all want, which is that high intent, high probability opportunity along the
right.
way.
Yeah. And that's why the consistency of everyone on our team, especially sales and leadership, sharing the right type of content consistently, commenting so people see you engaging with other people's content. It shows that you're part of the industry. It shows that you have influence in the industry. That's why LinkedIn is so important. And that consistency. And I get it. It's really hard. It's a new motion. It's a very new motion for salespeople to show up on LinkedIn, to have good quality content, to be consistent. And I still believe most people are scared to death of sharing content in LinkedIn or any other social media. And we know the numbers. I think it's climbing because of AI. That could be good, it could be bad, but 2% of people on LinkedIn share content consistently. And I think LinkedIn defines that as at least twice a month they publish. 2% of over what, 1.3 billion people share at least 2 posts a month. That means there's a ton of opportunity for those that do create content. But I get it. We're scared to share the wrong thing. And I believe one of the unspoken obstacles to creating content is fear. We're all, I mean, it's human nature. We're scared to be rejected. Nobody wants to be rejected. What if I post some stuff and nobody comments? What if I post something and no one cares? Like, I don't know if I was thinking of Carson. There's that scene in Back to the Future where Marty's dad, he's trying to get him to go talk to his mom. He's like, I don't think I can handle that kind of rejection. Like that's what I think is happening, and why people will say, I just don't have time to create content. I believe the real reason is, what if my content sucks and nobody responds to it? That's a scary thing.
Yeah, and it might, right? In fact,
Mhm.
some of your content is going to suck.
Yeah.
But again, I think if you can go back to, and we do this all the time, go back to how does my content align to helping them understand the three things that we want them to understand? How does it help them believe the three things we want them to believe? And then it may not be very good at first, but then it allows us an opportunity to get better and optimize and get
Yeah.
better and better and better.
And the three things you want them to understand and want them to believe, it's not about your product.
No, it's what they need to understand and believe to
Mhm.
be in that point to they're willing to converse and engage, willing to go to that engagement zone and go from there. It may have very little to do with your product. It may have to do with the market. It could vary again depending upon what you're selling and
Mhm.
what you're actually doing.
Yeah. Are we done with the slides?
Yeah, let's take the slide.
Yeah, look at that. Let's get
Yeah,
rid of that.
yeah,
There we go.
yeah.
All right.
Well, that's the first time we've ever done slides, I think. So
And we've done a few. I know Matt Dixon did
yeah,
slides,
that's
and
true.
I think
That's
you and
true.
I used them once before.
That's
But
true.
yeah, and I'm really curious whether you're on here live now, or you're watching this later. I'm really curious how this resonates with people, especially now. Like we haven't gone through the depths of that, and maybe it's been 6 to 8 months, Tom.
Hmm.
But I know that the world has changed a lot in the last 6 to 8 months, and what teams are struggling with and dealing with has changed quite a bit. And I'm hopeful that what we're sharing can help teams start thinking about the way they're trying to engage. We started this whole show with the topic of your buyers don't want to talk to you. But what if you had very strategic activities that you could be aggressive about, you could control, and that content helped them want to speak with you
Yeah.
and differentiate from your competitors so that they don't want to avoid you? They choose to talk to you because your actions have changed the lens in which the way they look at you. They look at you now as somebody that can help them instead of somebody that's just part of the noise that annoys them.
Yeah. And as we wrap up here, I'm going to you mentioned AI. Bob just mentioned AI. Why AI may kill what you're telling people to do.
Yeah.
Um, but go ahead.
I my opinion, I don't think it will. Um, I know I get the fear and I have it too, but I believe in humans. And I believe that humans are going to very quickly understand, see, feel, differentiate between the bot driven content and the real content that somebody's creating. And we've already created our own human spam filters. Like when we get messages in LinkedIn from somebody, we pretty quickly have a filter that goes, they're going to pitch slap me. And we move on.
Yeah.
And those, yes, they're going to increase in quantity for a while, but once the people using it start to realize it's not returning, they're not getting an ROI from it, they'll change and adapt, because nobody likes to do a whole bunch of activities that don't produce, except a lot of sales leaders now that demand their sales team pound the phones over and over again. But a lot of that is because they don't know what else to do.
Well, I agree with Bob. It's going to get way more noisy. It already is getting more noisy there. I do think, though, there is a real opportunity to rise above that noise. Maybe we can do a separate episode on
Mhm.
that. Um, I do think that the bar is going to be higher and higher for the quality of what you're doing, content wise, thought leadership wise. So I think the standard will end up getting risen
Mhm.
up. But I do think there's a real opportunity to kind of even follow some of the things we talked about today, really understand what your customer cares about, your prospect cares about. What do they need to understand? What do they want to believe? And how do you, again, rise above that noise? Um, I do think it's going to get noisier, but I think there's a
For
lot
sure.
of opportunity to rise above it.
Yeah, and before we wrap up, and I know we need to get going, but I'm going to invite anybody. You're on now, you're listening to the recording. This is stuff Tom and I would love to share with you and help you. There's a lot of very specific practical tactics that you can do to address this, to implement into your business that helps you get people into your anonymous zone, move them into the engagement zone, and get them to a place where they're seriously consider doing business to you. It's just different and it feels weird at first. But I can honestly say that the flywheel that we built in Fist Bump by doing this is working. And at first it didn't. And it was scary because we're like, what's going on? But before I had Fist Bump, I had my failure because we were pounding the phones and that company didn't work because we couldn't grow fast enough and we didn't go out and raise millions of dollars to
Right.
go ahead and make $5 by spending
Right.
500. So, but over the last 6 months or so, we're experiencing this flywheel starting to hum, and it's been really fun to watch. And I think for us, the slowness of our flywheel working had nothing to do with this model doesn't work. It had everything to do with what we're selling and people getting comfortable with or getting. I think our buyers had to get to the point where the pain was so much with the calls and emails that they were finally willing to yell uncle and go, okay,
But they
let's do
also
it.
moved up through the matrix, right? The fact
Yeah,
is, it takes time to do that. So
yeah,
you're starting to see the fruits of your labor that we
yeah,
just went through along the way. All right,
absolutely.
we've got to wrap up here. Great conversation today. Thank
I
you very
thought it was good. You thought it was good.
much. Yeah,
I'm curious what everyone else thinks with it, and
I think they
especially
think
this
we're nuts, but
episode.
that's all right.
Yeah, well, we are, but that's
But
another story.
that's right. That's
Yeah. All
all
right.
right.
Hey, before we wrap up, just a reminder we've got the webinar. I believe Nor had put in some links in the comments. If not, we can come back around afterwards. Mark Hunter and I, a week from tomorrow, May 23rd at 11 a.m. Eastern. Register, you'll get the links. Mark's awesome. Most of you know who he is. He was a phenomenal guest for us. I've gotten to know Mark more and more. Really, really appreciate him as a friend now, too. And I'm really excited about that and the tactical and practical side that he's going to bring to that. So, love to have you there if you want to register for it. If you can't find the links or anything, ping me and I'll get it over to you.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks,
All right.
everyone. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.